Recently, I've been able to complete all 3 games in the Dark Souls trilogy. I've become a huge fan of the series, and I've started to think a lot about what I like and don't like about each game. It's gotten to the point where I feel that I should make a series of videos talking about my experience with each installment in the series. This video is an introduction for the next 3 videos I'm making. So yeah, I'm gonna make 3 videos reviewing each Dark Souls game along with their DLC. Personally, I strongly believe these games are best played blind, although I don't spoil much in this video, and I'm intentionally using footage from early in the games, so as long as you're fine with some minor spoilers, you should be fine. I won't ruin any major surprises in the series for you. This video will be split into parts which you can skip to using the timecodes I added. The next part of this video will explain the basics of the Dark Souls series to someone who doesn't know a lot about these games. While it's important to watch this part of the video if you've never played a game in the series, it's also important if you're interested in watching all the reviews I'm making about these games, to get a better understanding of my perspective on the series basics. The section of the video after that will be about my experience with video games previous to Dark Souls, and what I've grown to love about video games in general. And the final part of the video will be a recommendation to those who haven't played Dark Souls before. Dark Souls 1 was released by From Software in 2011, and it is the first in the series without including Demon's Souls from 2009, a game I haven't played. From my understanding, Dark Souls 1 is a huge improvement, although I know many people still believe that Demon's Souls is a masterpiece. In 2012, the DLC was released for Dark Souls 1 titled Artorias of the Abyss, and a remaster of Dark Souls 1 was released in 2018, which included the base game and the DLC, with some visual enhancements and other minor changes. In 2014, Dark Souls 2 was released. The reception of the game seems pretty mixed at this point, despite the fact that Dark Souls 2 received the most positive reviews by critics. 3 DLCs were released for Dark Souls 2 in the same year, titled Crown of the Sunken King, Crown of the Old Iron King, and Crown of the Ivory King. The game was re-released in 2015 with the title Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. This includes the base game and all the DLC with some adjusted enemy placements, improved visuals, and some other changes. Finally, Dark Souls 3 was released in 2016, and its first DLC was released in the same year titled Ashes of Ariandel, and the second DLC titled Ring City was released in 2017. And as of now, it is the last piece of Dark Souls content, unless you include the spiritual installments, such as Bloodborne from 2015, which caused the series to be renamed the Soulsborne series. And maybe Sekiro? Shadows Die Twice from 2019, which seems to be debated whether it should be included as part of the series. Sekiro is definitely the most different of the games, but the fundamentals of the games are so similar that I personally include it as part of the series. With that out of the way, let's get into the contents of the actual games. The mechanics vary from game to game. Let me start with the healing mechanics in each game. In Dark Souls 1, the game gives you a healing item early in the game called an Estus Flask. When you rest at a bonfire, which are the checkpoints in the game, your Estus Flask is replenished. When you die, you return to the bonfire, and again your Estus Flask is completely replenished. You don't lose Estus upon death. Most bonfires give you 5 Estus Flasks, but some will grant you more than that. You can use a valuable item to increase the amount of Estus granted by an individual bonfire to 10. Later in the game, you can use more than one of this valuable item to increase the amount of Estus granted by a bonfire to 15 and then 20. You can use the Firekeeper's Soul to reinforce your Estus Flask, which will increase the amount of total hit points the player recovers when using a single flask. There are other items you can use in the game to heal yourself, but those are limited and will not reappear when you rest at a bonfire. You will have to either find these items or buy them from NPCs. In Dark Souls 2, however, limited items found throughout the game or bought by NPCs are much more prominent in the gameplay. They drop from enemies pretty frequently. You can also find them throughout the level. While the life gem is a huge part of the gameplay in Dark Souls 2, the Estus Flask is still there with some minor adjustments. It's no longer the bonfire that determines the amount of Estus Flask given to the player when they respawn or rest at a bonfire. Now you find Estus Shards, hidden around the map, which you can take to an NPC who will reinforce the shards into flasks. You can get a total of 12 Estus Flasks in Dark Souls 2, and you can increase the amount of hit points they recover by using an item called Sublime Bone Dust. Finally, in Dark Souls 3, the system is very similar to Dark Souls 2, except like Dark Souls 1, there are no life gems. You can reinforce Estus Shards to get a maximum of 15 flasks. You can also find Ashen Estus Flasks around the levels. You can also loot your Estus Flasks to choose how many you would like to be Ashen. The Ashen Estus Flask increases your FP, or focus points. This is a new stat that is shown in a blue bar that is unique to Dark Souls 3. FP limits the amount of magic you're able to use, and using an Estus Flask recovers your FP so you can use more. Other than that, the healing system in Dark Souls 3 is identical to the other 2 games. Since I really don't want to spend time explaining the mechanics of each game and how they differ, for simplicity, I'm going to stick to just explaining the basics of Dark Souls 1. Because in my reviews for Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, I want to talk about how the mechanics compare in quality to the mechanics of the first game. So let's get back to it. In Dark Souls 1, the second you enter a level, you're left to explore it. You can find bonfires which will save your progress so that it's possible to explore the level much further. Levels in this game are basically just an area of the world that has been sectioned off by checkpoints. The scale feels large enough to make each area feel like a believable place. The levels are rarely straightforward. It's very common that levels will split into multiple paths, which you can explore individually. Paths that are unnecessary for progression usually reward the player in some way for exploring. Some paths may lead to shortcuts that the player can open or create to make progression through the level more convenient. Throughout the area, there will pretty much always be enemies which you can engage with in combat. The combat system allows the player to wield a weapon, such as a sword, an axe, a spear, a club, and you will have a second slot for a shield. You can fight from a distance using sorceries, pyromancies, or bow and arrow, but you are most likely to use a melee weapon for the majority of the game. You will also probably want to wear armor of some sort. Armor will decrease the amount of damage you will take when an attack is successfully dealt to the player. Usually the armor that decreases the amount of damage that is dealt the most will also usually weigh the most. If you're carrying a lot of weight, then your character will roll more slowly. This is important in combat, and let me use that as a transition. When you fight an enemy, you can dodge their attack by rolling. The player is invincible for a certain amount of frames when rolling, allowing them to clear an attack without taking damage by dodging it. If your character is carrying too much weight, then their roll will be slowed down significantly. This means rolling will probably not be an option in combat for this character. Luckily for those players, you can use a shield to block an attack. This requires less timing, but as a consequence of blocking an attack by holding up a shield, the character is locked into place for a short period of time as they recover from the strike. You also lose some stamina. Both of these factors limit your ability to retaliate, unlike rolling. The stamina bar will decrease every time the player runs, rolls, blocks an attack, or attacks themselves. When the stamina bar depletes completely, you will have to wait for it to regenerate before you can do any of these. Although the time it takes for the stamina bar to completely regenerate is relatively quick. The final way a player can deflect an attack from an opponent is by parrying. This means the player will bash their shield into the enemy's weapon and push it out of the way, staggering the enemy and allowing the player to perform a very high damage attack. The enemy will need time to recover where they are granted invincibility frames. During this time, the player will recover any stamina they lost by performing the parry and attack. Parrying requires a lot of precision and timing, and if you fail to parry, the results can be detrimental. Here you can see me dying to some of the easiest enemies in the entire game just because I failed the timing when parrying. Parrying is very risky, but if you're successful, it's very rewarding. Combat in this game is generally pretty slow, but there's a lot of tension due to the fact that both the player and the enemies inflict a lot of damage onto each other. This not only makes the fights more challenging, but more importantly, it keeps the stakes high in nearly every encounter, meaning that combat is almost always engaging. A huge majority of the times you take damage from enemies, you'll have to use your flasks to recover the damage you took. This creates a lot of tension. Do you use the Estus Flask when you've taken minimal damage? If you don't use the Estus Flask in this situation, then you may be at more risk, but if you do, you may need that Estus Flask later. I think moments like this make Dark Souls great and add so much tension to the experience. The Estus Flask really ties exploration and the combat together. You have to find the next bonfire, but you can only take so much damage. The Estus Flask tells you how many mistakes you can make without dying before you can get to the bonfire. And mistakes are not just mistakes in combat. Here I fall and I'm now stuck in this separated part of the level. I'm forced to fight more enemies than I would have if I went through the correct path. Through trial and error, you can improve at exploration in the level by figuring out the quickest and safest path to the next bonfire. And you can improve at combat by being able to get through the entire level while barely taking any damage from enemies in it. Eventually, you'll be able to make so few mistakes that you will be able to survive the trek from one bonfire to the next. But now let's switch it up. What if there's a boss at the end of the level instead of a bonfire? Now you'll not only have to make so few mistakes that you're able to survive the journey from the bonfire to the boss, but you'll also have to take so little damage that you have enough Estus Flasks to defeat the boss, since the bosses in these games are almost always challenging. Maybe you'll get through the area and take too much damage so that you won't have enough healing items to overcome the boss. Will you still attempt the boss to continue improving at it despite the fact that you're almost definitely going to fail, or will you turn around to return to your bonfire and attempt to get through the level without taking as much damage this time? Deciding which option you want to pursue again adds tension to the game and keeps the player engaged. The game here respects the player and provides them with freedom to make the choice for themselves. The journey from the bonfire to the boss not only forces the player to improve at exploration and combat through trial and error, but now you'll also be improving at the boss fight with each attempt. Over time, you may be able to get through every enemy that used to give you trouble unscathed. This sort of improvement is ridiculously satisfying, and by this point, you will likely be able to defeat the boss. It should then be clear now that damage has to be preventable. The player must be given some sort of indication so that they know they need to prevent themselves from getting damaged. If the player is damaged by something that isn't preventable, then the game won't feel fair. the player will likely feel frustrated and the game will most likely not be as enjoyable. Since the Estus class should represent how many mistakes you can make, then each and every one of your mistakes must be entirely your fault if the game intends to be fair and enjoyable. Every single enemy drops souls when they die. You also drop souls when you die, and you can recover them by returning to wherever you died. Souls are completely necessary to buy items from NPCs who sell them. They are also necessary to repair broken armor, weapons, and shields with the assistance of a blacksmith. You can also upgrade or reinforce your weapons, shield, and armor with a blacksmith. Using souls, you can increase the amount of endurance you have, the amount of health, strength, and a variety of other things. I personally think that being able to pick up your souls when you die is not only a way to motivate the player to return to where they were when they die, requiring them to at least get to where they were, so that they probably will improve, but it also trivializes your failure. Even when you die, you can recover your progress from your last attempt. This mechanic also increases the tension with each attempt because maybe a lot of souls are on the line. Death isn't really that bad a thing in these games. It's not necessarily a good thing and you have to spend time returning to where you were, but ultimately death is treated as normal and expected. You need to fail to improve and eventually succeed, or else your success doesn't really mean anything. You learn from your mistakes and you'll eventually be able to get to the bonfire, or be able to beat the boss. And when this happens, it's extremely satisfying, rewarding, and well, it just feels awesome. The first time I heard about Dark Souls, I was told about how someone finished the entire game without taking any damage. I then asked what Dark Souls was, to which the person responded, "It's the hardest game of all time." A statement which really made me completely uninterested, for multiple reasons. First, I wasn't particularly good at video games in general at the time. Honestly, I'm still not. But the main thing that made me completely uninterested in Dark Souls, based on the statement, "It's really hard," is because difficulty didn't interest me. If a game is known for difficulty and that alone, then it's probably intentionally really hard and tedious so that players with an ego can waste their time beating a game, not because they enjoy it, but because they can brag about how they beat Dark Souls, the hardest game of all time. They don't want to beat the game because they're immersed or because they're enjoying the experience, it's simply to prove to themselves that they're good at video games. Now obviously I've completely changed my opinion, and I did a complete 180 after actually playing the game. But what was it about Dark Souls that changed my opinion? Why did I even play Dark Souls if I had such a narrow-minded and reductive view on the game only because I heard it was difficult? Why don't we start there? Surprisingly, it wasn't actually anything to do with Dark Souls. I changed my view on difficulty in video games because of two other games I played. The first being Undertale. I really enjoyed this game. I played it when it came out, and I replayed it over and over and over again after I finished it. In Undertale, the ending and the final boss you fight is dependent on how you played the game. By playing the game differently on subsequent playthroughs, you get a better understanding of the game's world, the characters who inhabit it, and how your actions affect them. There's three main playthroughs. There's the pacifist route, where you don't kill any monster in the underground. The genocide route, which is where you kill every monster in the underground. And I don't mean you kill every monster you encounter, I mean you continuously grind until every single monster is dead. You literally murder an entire race of creatures. Calling it the genocide route is genuinely accurate. And finally there's the neutral route, which is somewhere in between. Once you beat the neutral route, you get a phone call from a character you can only kill in the genocide route. He explains to you how your actions affected the underground. You also usually get to talk to some of the other characters you left alive, and you get to hear their reaction to the deaths of the characters you killed. But something special happens when you complete the genocide route. You get to fight Sans, a character who wouldn't fight you under any other circumstance. This is a really difficult fight, especially in contrast to the other ones in the game, but for me it was especially difficult because video games really weren't my thing for a while. I owned no recent consoles at the time, and I didn't even own a PC when I played this game. I played Undertale on a MacBook Pro. I spent weeks and weeks stuck on this guy, but I never gave up. I continued to improve and learn his attacks, and eventually I beat it. I remember the night I beat it vividly. I was so ridiculously thrilled that I was finally able to do it. After that, I beat it for my sister, who wasn't really interested in beating a boss. She just wanted to go through the genocide route, and I felt even more accomplished. Later, I beat it for some friends who also weren't interested in fighting the boss, and I realized that I was wrong. I enjoyed it because it was difficult. There are a lot of great bosses in Undertale, but they're great because of the characters and the music more than the gameplay, which is intentionally simplistic and easy to overcome because it's not really the focus. That's not to say the Sans fight isn't also good because of the character and the music. The character has become super iconic, and it's interesting that you're only able to fight him under specific circumstances. Also, the music in this fight has probably become the most famous part of this entire game. But the Sans fight also has the gameplay going for it. Overall, this is the most memorable fight in the entire game because I was motivated to complete it despite the difficulty, and I felt way more accomplished after beating it because it was a challenge. I'm sure many people will think that playing one boss in a video game for weeks is a waste of time. How could playing the same boss for weeks be fun? But it was. and if I could do it all over again, I probably would. But I got so good at the fight that it'll probably never be as difficult for me ever again. So if I wanted to get the same feeling of accomplishment again, I would have to play a different, challenging game. Cuphead was a game I bought for the art direction, and then I quickly realized while playing the game that it was going to be really difficult. I just remember seeing a bunch of YouTube videos talking about how hard this game was and comparing it to Dark Souls, because Dark Souls seems to be some sort of synonym for difficulty in video games.
I think we've kind of made the Dark Souls of competitive first-person shooters.
I think Cuphead really confirmed how much I enjoyed difficulty in video games. I wasn't motivated at all to beat the bosses because of an interesting story or character. I wanted to fight the Cuphead bosses because I wanted to beat the boss. My one and only motivation was the enjoyable gameplay. Now I want to spend this part of the video to make it clear that difficulty doesn't make something good. If the Sans fight wasn't fair or enjoyable to me, then I wouldn't have played it. It's the quality music, the interesting story and character, and the fair and enjoyable gameplay that motivated me to actually complete the boss. If the only thing it had going for it was difficulty, I wouldn't have spent any time on it. A great example about how difficulty can be bad is this Cuphead run and gun. You can end up getting a lot of cheap deaths because of the awkward, narrow, and limited area you're able to move around. And the only strategy that worked for me at all was using this ability, which allows you to go invincible for a limited period of time. But you need to parry 5 individual things to use this ability. So to guarantee you're actually going to be able to use this ability, you have to wait for a bunch of pink fish to come around, which requires a ton of waiting. And waiting is never fun.
If it's not fun, why bother?
So overall, you have to spend a ton of time waiting, which is never fun. You're not given very much freedom in the way you're able to approach the level, and a lot of the deaths can feel so unfair that it feels like this level requires more luck than skill. I want to make it clear that Cuphead is still a really great game, even if it has some bad moments like this. But after getting sick of Cuphead, I wanted a new challenge. I was finally a fan of difficulty in video games, and I wanted something fresh. Something 3D, since both Cuphead and Undertale are 2D, and after hearing everyone compare it to Cuphead, I finally purchased it. The moment you've all been waiting for, I played Dark Souls, and I loved it. I want to recommend Dark Souls to everyone watching who hasn't played it. I've spent the last section explaining why difficulty can be a really great thing. It can make a game really satisfying to play. But even if this game's reputation is being the hardest game of all time, I want to make a bold claim here. I think every single person watching this video can beat Dark Souls. Genuinely. While I love this series for its difficulty and the feeling of accomplishment when beating a difficult challenge, I also think the reputation is kind of BS. It's definitely difficult, but it's absolutely not the hardest game of all time. If you have any patience, you can beat any of these games, honestly. I also think difficulty is far from the only thing this game has going for it. What about the unique and creative creature designs for the enemies and bosses, some of which have become pretty iconic and they totally deserve that status? What about the animations for the bosses and enemies that put games that came out years later to shame? What about the mechanics? I really struggle to think of any game that's healing system is better than the one in Dark Souls. Even games made by the same people that came out years afterwards. What about the level design that feels like a Mario level in the way they carefully and thoughtfully place enemies? What about the fantastic art direction of the areas, and the atmosphere that's created, and the epic scale, and how engaging it is? How about the iconic NPCs, who each have their own journey and conclusion, which is usually horribly tragic? How about the combat and the exploration and the way the game is brilliantly able to evoke a certain mood and feeling to the player? But my favorite thing about Dark Souls is something I haven't even mentioned in this video: the world design. It is so coherent and fits together so believably, but the best part is something I can't show in this video because I refuse to spoil it to new players. The world fits together in a way that's truly unique to Dark Souls, and it made me fall in love with this game. There are so many routes you can open up to make an interconnected world with multiple paths to multiple areas that are all woven together meticulously. You start to have a map of the world in your head and are able to figure out the best route from one area to another because the world gets ingrained in your brain. The inconvenience and limitations weirdly make the world design far more enthralling than any other game I've played. I haven't played or even heard of a single game that comes even close to matching this world design. Even the people that made Dark Souls haven't been able to match this world design or even get anywhere close. The other thing I think this game is known for is having a confusing story that isn't important to the game. It's also told through things like item descriptions. I understand why some may think this is bad storytelling, but that summation isn't entirely accurate. I don't want to get into it much here, but just know the story is basically just background noise, especially on your first playthrough. You may pick up on things or search for answers, but the story never interrupts the gameplay. Without a doubt in my mind, I definitely recommend Dark Souls. I think it's the best of the trilogy for new players because it's probably the best at teaching the series basics. It's also my favorite of the three, and it also is the first of the trilogy, so play it first. Obviously not every person watching this video is going to buy the game, but if you didn't take that away from my recommendation part of the video, maybe you could at least get a better understanding of why people enjoy these games if you've never played them. Hopefully you're not like I was after hearing about Dark Souls and its difficulty, and can at least understand my perspective. My experiences with these games are entirely subjective. You might have a completely different experience with this game, but personally I adore Dark Souls. I definitely recommend you play the game. It is so ridiculously good. Although, that's just my opinion. Thank you for watching this video. By the time this video comes out, I will be working on my next video, which will be a more in-depth and focused review / critique / analysis of Dark Souls 1, with spoilers and all. If you like this video, then give it a like, and if you're interested in the ones I'm working on, then you should subscribe and click the bell so you're notified when the next videos come out. And share this video with any and all Dark Souls fans you know. I'm sorry for all the shameless and brash channel endorsement, but I really worked hard on this video, and I'm working even harder on the next one, so I'd be pretty sad if they got like 50 views or something. I appreciate all comments, and I'm excited to see how you guys respond to this video. Thank you, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye.